Hey everyone, welcome. Today is Monday, April 8th. We are doing chapter 5 of Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression by Dr. Schubiner. And chapter 5 is about what you can do. So it's, what is it? Oh yeah, what can you do about anxiety and depression? That's the chapter title. So we will go ahead and start with our slides, just summarizing the chapter so far, and feel free to pop anything that you would like that's relevant into the chat if you have a question or a comment or a thought about it. Love for it to be kind of interactive if you guys want. But I'm also happy to talk about this the whole time too. All right, so what can you do about your anxiety and depression? I love this quote. Although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it, by Helen Keller. So this chapter goes over 4 steps of what you can do specifically. And then they are simple and they're clear, but not necessarily easy. And just so you know, if you have any of the chronic pain symptoms that we talk about that are common, I'll show you a slide with them. And basically most chronic pain that's lasted over 3 to 6 months, you're going to be using these same principles to unlearn chronic pain as you would with anxiety and depression. So that's really cool, especially since most of us have like multiple symptoms, not just anxiety or depression, probably some of both or one more than the other, and some neck pain or some shoulder pain or headaches or things like that. So you will need to devote a certain amount of commitment, energy, and work toward your goal, but you can succeed. You do not need to use medications for this program to work. And if you are currently taking medications, you do not need to stop them. So this is a big question people often wonder about. We'll talk more about it later, but the main thing is you're reducing your fear. So if getting off all of your medications right now is very fear producing, he says you can stay on your medications for now. It's possible and even likely that you'll be able to wean yourself off the medications for anxiety and depression, which I recommend you do in consultation with your physician. So definitely consult with your doctor if you're thinking about that. But again, just to emphasize, you don't have to hurry and do that so that this program will be successful. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so step 1, understand that mind-body syndrome is the cause of your symptoms. So it's critical that you understand that mind-body syndrome can cause all of the anxiety and depressive symptoms that you have suffered from. Understanding this will allow you to recover fully. So when it's the case with chronic pain, sometimes you have to kind of investigate the situation. But with anxiety and depression, if you're having the symptoms we're talking about in this book, you can unlearn them. And then, of course, like I said, there are other symptoms that may also be caused by mind-body syndrome: chronic neck or back pain, tension or migraine headaches, fibromyalgia, IBS, bladder syndrome, chronic fatigue, insomnia, and other symptoms. And they have been learned by your brain. That's the process of why all of these are happening, independent of what the diagnosis is. The whole cause of it is learned neural circuits from your brain and body in response to the stressful events that occurred in your life. So just as a reminder, this was in one of the previous chapters, all these chronic pain syndromes. And it doesn't list every single part of the body: back pain, neck pain, ankle pain, elbow pain, right finger pain, but the idea is anything more than 3 to 6 months, right? We won't go through all of these, but remember, doing this work will help all of them. So, belief that your symptoms are caused by genes over which you have no control, or diseases of the brain, or they're too entrenched to change. If you have those beliefs, you will not have the belief that you can recover. So if you think about the genetic argument, we just want to remember that genes can be turned on and off. depending on the environment and life stressors. And so they can be turned on with stress and they can be turned off by the healing processes in this program. So definitely, I've even had one client that was talking about a test that they were doing where they could actually test if the genetic marker was turned on and off, on or off. And by doing this work, and later when she was retested, it was off. So those are like limiting beliefs, right? Those are things that keep us from healing because we just don't believe that we can. So belief is a powerful, powerful trigger that causes positive changes in the brain, changes that reverse anxiety and depression. So develop the confidence also. So this is another thing, developing the confidence that you can take the necessary steps to heal. So understand that you have mind-body syndrome. It's not a disease. And even if you just entertain the possibility that you can recover, it will help you as long as you begin. So you don't have to have full belief first. So you could just, I like to say, open the door just a crack. And then entertaining that idea, you can start this program and then you start building your own evidence. You can allow yourself to have hope, and this hope will give you courage to continue on your path to recovery. Okay, so step 2, reverse your brain's reactions to stressful life events. If you think about it and remember from previous chapters, the same areas of the brain are activated by physical injuries and emotional injuries. Both of those can cause physical symptoms in the body. And emotional injuries, that could be things like memories, emotional hurts that occurred in the past. Those things do not simply disappear over time. So more often than not, it just becomes part of our hardwiring of like how we approach the world based on those injuries and emotional hurts. And so our bodies can produce symptoms, our brains can produce symptoms in our bodies when it thinks an emotional hurt like that might happen again. So lessons learned early in life create pathways that are stored in the brain, just like neural circuits, Pavlov's dogs, right? Early life stressors may not cause the immediate development of mind-body symptoms, but they do create the neural circuits, which sets up the architecture for the danger and fear responses. So maybe you didn't have symptoms as a kid, maybe you did, but even if you did or didn't, it's like the hardwire, the architecture was being formed, and then later in life, a stressful event could trigger the stored emotional hurts, causing mind-body syndrome symptoms to develop. So sometimes people, say there's like trauma stored in the body. So the way you can hear how Schubiner is describing it, it's more like there's these learned neural circuits of the brain from connecting the brain to the body. And when it is triggered, the brain fires that response that could cause the muscle to tighten in that one part of your lower back or whatever it is. Okay. And so that's in a sense stored, but it's not like it's trapped in your lower back. It's just stored as a defense mechanism. So when the situation later in life is quite similar in an emotional sense to earlier life situations, or if there's a traumatic event, either emotionally or physically, then you're more likely to have those symptoms come back or start. And then if you think about which emotions are generally responsible for these feelings in our bodies, fear, anger, guilt, shame, sadness, and grief. So he talks a little bit about each of those a little later. If you think about it generally with fear, when you're holding on to fear, it leads to anxiety disorders of OCD, PTSD, social anxiety disorder, so social phobia, and panic disorders. And then when we become overwhelmed with fear, depression and fatigue are common reactions. So it's like going from that flight state to freeze. And then Another, or the second common response to emotional injury is anger and resentment. So one response may be the body giving us pain, one response may be anger and resentment. And or yeah, oh, I guess it's fear. So it could be fear or it could be resentment. So anger, if you think about it, it's kind of interesting to think about. It's actually a healthier response to being hurt than fear. So when you feel trapped or powerless and you're fearful, um, usually that is like you have no hope. You don't know what you're going to do, or you have to fight, right? But if you well, if you have anger, then you do feel like there's some hope. There's something worth fighting for. There's something you can do. It's energetic. So if you're feeling trapped and powerless, fear is usually manifest and anger is usually suppressed. Like it's not really safe for me to be angry when I'm a little child, and my parents will just get angrier. And I learn to just suppress the anger at a subconscious level as a child. So, if you can become powerful, it's possible to express anger and overcome the effects of someone who is causing us harm. And especially since some of this hardwiring, or most of it, was laid down during our childhood when there was that going on, but now it's being triggered by events that may not even be, you know, similar or exactly the same. It's important for us to feel more empowered to express things. So, most children who are hurt emotionally are powerless and unable to express their anger, and they learn to hold their anger in. So, you might have been taught, like, good girls don't get angry, or maybe you saw a parent who was angry and that you just swore you would never be like that. So, you never wanted to feel that. But we are holding anger in at a subconscious level. Like when I started this work, I really did not think of myself as an angry person. I really rarely felt anger, but I would feel a lot of sadness in an angry situation because I felt hopeless about it. And I would turn my anger inwards with beating myself up and being really critical. So those are ways we can kind of repress the anger. So then that can lead to a lifelong pattern of feeling afraid, being unable to express your anger or assert yourself. And then certain personality traits that are useful to cope with the traumatic situations become habitual, such as perfectionism, putting oneself last, being self-critical, taking on too much responsibility. Do you guys resonate with any of those? Listen for these. See if this sounds like you, some of these parts. Learning to overcome that pattern of holding anger in and learning to be more assertive are critical components in unlearning anxiety or depression. So we're going to learn to be more angry and assertive and critical. No, just kidding. That was a critical component, but it sounds a little weird, right? I thought it did at first, like how to be more angry, but we want to learn to express it, right? And express it in a proper way, which we'll talk about. Yeah. And Angela says, yes, I can relate to all of these. Yeah. And remember, like if we have those personality traits, it's because we developed them because it was the best way to cope when we were children. It's just what our nervous system decided. There was really not much of a choice. So other sets of emotions that often promote the development of mind-body syndrome are guilt and shame. So first we'll take guilt, and there's deserved guilt and undeserved guilt. I'd never really heard this, understood this. So deserved guilt, you recognize that you've actually made a mistake. So most people with mind-body syndrome tend to feel guilty for many things that they've done, and they have a hard time letting go of that guilt or forgiving themselves for mistakes, even though they would easily forgive others for similar actions. So that could be kind of your gold standard is, would I forgive, my child if they did that same thing, my sister, my friend, someone I love, would I forgive them, but I'm still not forgiving myself for a mistake that I made? Because we all make mistakes. That's part of learning. But if you're holding on to that guilt, then that could be coming out in your body. Oh, I'm just going to read this from Mary. I didn't like it when my mom was mad at me, so I tried really hard not to make her mad. Right. Sounds like what I see going on with parents and children everywhere, right? She didn't do anything at all bad, but she stewed for days on things. Yeah. So even those subtle signals, like a lot of people who come to this work are empathic. We've learned to read others' cues. We've learned to be kind of in that flight state while we're reading cues. So we might read things into things that weren't really there. And we know children do that too, right? They're like, might take responsibility for their parents fighting, even though they might think it's their fault because they weren't a good enough kid. Like, so easy, right? It's so easy to see how this develops. And hopefully that helps you be more compassionate with yourself. Okay, and then there's undeserved guilt. So really listen up to this one. Many women, for example, might have undeserved guilt for having been sexually assaulted as if the event was their fault. Many children assume undeserved guilt for their parents' divorce. It's easy to see, hopefully. Please look at yourself. Think if there's any undeserved guilt, things you might be beating yourself up for that really are not even your fault, and see that this form of guilt is harmful. Both forms are, but this one is harmful and needs to be abandoned. Okay. Undeserved guilt. It's another example that's really, really common is you might feel guilty for resenting someone or being angry towards someone, even if it's justified. So that could be especially with people we're close to, like our parents, siblings, spouses, and children. So we might feel angry and resentful because they're being jerks, right? They're like being inappropriate. And anger is a normal response to want to protect yourself and defend yourself. But then if you've been learning or you were, conditioned and you learned to repress anger, if that starts to come up, you could feel guilty. Oh, I shouldn't feel bad about, or I shouldn't, be mad at my sister. She's done so much for me, or I should just let her talk to me like that, right? You're going to learn how to stand up for yourself more here. So accessing this particular type of guilt is often critical in order to process and resolve anger. So it's not like we're trying to or like never feel guilt again. We actually want to be aware of all of our emotions. That's what we're learning here. There's this emotional awareness and expression in a healthy way, which we'll talk about with anger. So it might involve feeling some guilt and then moving through it towards love and acceptance of yourself, and in many cases towards love and acceptance of the other people involved. So yeah, definitely we're gonna look at all of these emotions as like it's normal that they're produced, and which ones can we like just totally get rid of, and which ones can we use in a helpful way to move it towards actually compassion for ourselves, which will help us be more loving towards other people. And Allison said, this is your experience right now, like going through the guilt and the anger. Angela, resentful for having to be a caretaker and then guilty about it. That is a perfect example. I think a lot of people my age are getting to that stage where parents are starting to need some help. Part of us, Dr. Schubiner says, we can have totally conflicting thoughts. This is normal. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. You could have evil thoughts even, and you might want to help your parents. And part of you does not want to, and you want to be free, and you wish you didn't have to do that. And you don't think it's fair that the other siblings aren't helping. And then you're mad at them, and then you feel guilty for having those emotions. You see how that's like the second layer of these negative emotions that's just pushing it all down. Yeah, everyone's agreeing with that, with that, Angela, about the guilt, the caretaking. A lot of this mind body stuff does have to do with a sense of duty and putting other people in, above yourself. Not above yourself, but like caring for others at your own expense. So, this is what this work brings out. Like it doesn't, it's not just like, you know, writing out worksheets and things like that. It's like, how can you take these things that we're learning and apply it into your life to make your life more healthy and more like where your nervous system can be more regulated, more safe feeling. Okay. So we'll talk about that. And yeah, Angela, you're not alone. I love my mother, but it's hard to take care of an elderly parent. Then she died, and now I feel guilty that I felt that way. And now she's gone. Oh, you guys, this is such real stuff for sure. And like Dr. Schubiner said, I think it was the last chapter, like most people with mind body syndrome are the nicest people. They're the ones you want to be friends with. They're like kind and considerate and loving and right. So if you're identifying with this, be so sweet to yourself and show yourself some of that love and just start to even maybe recognize the guilt. Just be like, oh, I think that's guilt where I'm saying, you shouldn't have done that. Why did you do that? Why are you acting like that? That's guilt. Okay. And shame is a powerful blocker of healing. That's like a shaming way to talk to yourself. Why do you keep doing this? How come you can't figure this out? So, shame at its core is the belief that you're not a good person, you're not worthy of being loved, or that you don't deserve to be happy. So, um, we all experience shame sometimes, Brene Brown says, unless you're a psychopath. So, shame, again, is part of those emotions that are part of the normal human experience. But we also want to know when it does happen that it is, something to look at because it's probably, I've heard shame is always a lie. And I do believe that. So, we are worthy of being loved. All of us, every single one of us deserves to be happy and loved. And I think at the core, we're all good people. Oh, Mary, I just started a grief class and the first topic was guilt. Whoa. Yeah, that's really cool. These are so interrelated. So that's why you can just start kind of applying what's going on with you right now in this work. And, we'll get to all these other levels. So, people who were not fully loved or accepted in their childhood, or were frequently told that they weren't good enough or smart enough or good looking enough, tend to develop shame. For me, I was raised in a religious culture that talked about worthiness really depending on if you like followed the commandments and lived righteously, things like that. And so it when I got into self-development and heard this term like everyone's worthy, I was like, wait, what? It depends on if you do enough good things and help enough people and, so worthy of being loved, worthy, of happiness doesn't mean, we don't have to get into all of that. But for me, I had so much shame about pretty much everything. So guilt and shame are both forms of anger being turned inward toward yourself. Like I was saying before, I wasn't like super angry other than maybe some outbursts, but was super good at beating myself up, like harshly. These are destructive emotions, and consciously dealing with them will allow you to reverse mind-body syndrome. Then loss of the physical presence or affection from an important person in our lives will cause sadness and grief. As with other emotions, sadness and grief need to be experienced, expressed, and released instead of being suppressed in order to fully heal from mind-body syndrome and banish your anxiety or depression. So it's pretty simple, like he said, in the concept. We want to acknowledge these emotions, acknowledge that they're normal, express them, and release them. And then the emotion that everyone longs to experience is love. When we're truly able to experience love, caring, and kindness towards ourselves and towards others, healing on a deep level occurs and mind-body symptoms melt away. I love that. I love how he says that. So that's cool, right? You think you're coming in just to like lower your pain and maybe you'll do some breathing and things like that, but you're gonna learn how to actually like show up in the world in a loving way towards you and towards other people so you can enjoy your life and have less symptoms. So that's a pretty good deal. Holding on to anger and resentment towards others blocks the ability to love them fully. And it's obvious that turning anger towards yourself by holding on to grief or being unable to forgive yourself or living with shame will block your ability to love yourself. So if you have these blocks from these emotions, you're just blocking yourself from love, and that doesn't feel good, even physically. Many people with mind-body syndrome are unable to say that they're a good person or that they can truly feel compassion towards themselves. That's totally where I was. So if you're feeling that, chances are, because you're here, you actually are a pretty decent person and your friends and people that love you would agree. And when you can truly start to feel that compassion for yourself, all this stuff starts to change. So the exercises in this book, we'll start getting to them even next week, are designed to release your suppressed anger, let go of your guilt and shame, allow yourself to experience your grief, and then allow you to move toward loving relationships with yourself and the important people in your life. When you're able to do this, anxieties and fears from your past do not weigh upon you, and the normal stresses of everyday life become more easily manageable, right? So you got to deal with all that repressed emotion and things from the past, and then your job day to day becomes less stressful because you're not carrying around all of that emotional burden, repression. Or if you think about it, those coping strategies that you developed. Okay, so then step 3 is to reprogram your brain. So the first part of that is to change your response to your symptoms of anxiety and depression. Those are caused by subconscious processes in the brain, and Dr. Schubiner says it's necessary to override them by using your conscious brain. So, some people would say you need to do it more somatically, but also this is more a brain-based approach. And you can always do some of both because that's what we do with the somatic work we do in here is, basically going into the body and responding to it differently. But also, what we're going to talk about here is using your conscious mind, your logical mind. So first, you need to stop being afraid of the symptoms. If you're fearful of being anxious or depressed, you'll lose the battle to overcome these feelings. The more you're afraid of these symptoms or chronic pain symptoms that are due to mind-body syndrome, the more power those symptoms have over you. So fear makes them have power over you, makes them amplified. The more fear you harbor, the worse the anxiety or depression will be. So the example is like a panic attack. And most of the panic attacks are caused by anxiety of having a panic attack, starting to worry that you might get one, and then having the symptoms come and then fear from them. So remember, these feelings, these symptoms, they can't actually harm you. And you must constantly remind yourself not to fear anxiety and depression and continually vow to yourself that you're going to stop fearing them. So, like if you are noticing a lot of anxious thoughts, you can notice that by the feeling in your body of what anxiety feels like for you. And not just fearing the symptom of anxiety, but actually really checking in with yourself about what you're anxious about, because chances are if you're feeling anxiety, it's not something your brain needs to be worrying about, right? So just you can label it, this is anxiety, and okay, I don't need to worry about this stuff. I don't need to fear this stuff. and especially if they're physical symptoms. When you see these symptoms for what they really are, simply learned neural circuits, then you can stop fearing them and just relax in the knowledge that you're not only okay, you're actually healthy and strong. You're going to be fine. So sometimes I think of them as like the rumble strips on the freeway. So you have some symptoms, you feel things, and then it's that indicator of like, okay, you're getting a little too stressed, you're feeling too much overwhelmed, you're being mean to yourself again, and course correct. Changing the symptoms of anxiety and depression is accomplished by interrupting the neural circuits that are maintaining them. Fear and worry is often combined with frustration and excessive focus on the symptoms, plus spending a great deal of time and effort trying to fix them. Do you guys recognize some of these as the 6 Fs? You know, he talks about the 6 Fs that increase pain: fear, frustration, focusing, and then trying to fix them. That's a few of them. I think we're missing one or two, but these are normal, right? And they also increase pain. So we might get feedback that these sensations are intolerable, scary, and frankly dangerous. And then the brain ramps up the symptoms more. So it's this pain fear cycle, or anxiety fear cycle, or depression fear cycle. And the neural circuits can be unlearned. Every time you notice the anxiety, depression, or pain, you have the opportunity to lower the brain's danger signal by remaining calm, by tolerating the symptoms without fearing them, and by reminding yourself that you will be getting better. Okay, so then the second part of, I think we're on rewiring your brain, is challenging the specific triggers of your symptoms. So for example, anxiety might be triggered by certain places, you know, the doctor's office or the hospital or a certain city, situation, sounds, smells, or memories. These are just these habits, learned or conditioned responses created by the association of anxiety with these situations. So you've had a moment on that stage that you had anxiety, and then you associate anxiety with stages and performing. A common trigger for depression is the decreased amount of daylight in the winter, known as seasonal affective disorder, SAD. So depression with winter is also a learned response, which can be unlearned. So depression happens, same time that all these other factors are going on, the brain links wintertime, depression, and that can be unlearned. Good news. So you don't have to just move. If you are doing things like moving, or, I mean, of course, you're some things, sometimes that's the easiest thing to do. But if it is starting to make your life smaller, like, okay, I don't really go out of my house for 6 months out of the year, and then I become more isolated, and then I, you know, become more sedentary, and then I start having more pain and more depressed, and then avoiding triggers isn't as helpful. It gives the triggers power over you and makes you feel more helpless. And generally what I see is, you know, maybe sometimes it works to avoid some triggers, but eventually you'll have one thing that works for a little while, and then it doesn't work anymore. And so then you have to come up with another thing. So your life just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, smaller, smaller. And feeling trapped is an important part of mind-body syndrome. So we don't want to feel isolated and small and trapped. So it's critical to learn to encounter your triggers without reacting to them with responses of anxiety, depression, or pain. The best way to do this is to purposefully go into any triggering event with a new and confident attitude, instead of being worried or fearful about what might happen to you as you begin exercising, or start crossing a bridge, or bite into a certain food, or encounter a certain weather pattern or quality of light. The more you will be confident that this trigger won't hurt you or harm you. So we talk about this with graded exposure, and you start to open that door just a crack of maybe it's not the food causing this pain. Maybe it's not the light causing my headache. Maybe I actually can do neck rolls dancing without the pain coming. So expose yourself to those triggers in a graded way. You can talk to yourself and your mind and body saying something like this: I'm healthy and strong. There's nothing wrong with me. I can do this and I will do this without it causing anxiety, depression, or pain. Okay, and then we're to step 4, make changes in your life. These are changes that are necessary, important, or healthy. So just like we were talking about avoiding triggers, it doesn't mean, okay, well, there's lots of aspects of my life that are stressful, so I need to change them. I need to quit my job. I need to divorce my spouse and probably give away my children because they're stressful. Like, we want to make the changes that we can that best support our life. And so some people, through doing this work, they realize their reaction patterns were actually causing their spouse to react in certain ways too. And when they do this work, their spouse suddenly is a different person in many ways too. So just as you're listening to this part, think about those changes you might want to make out of fear of your life, and actually some changes that you're like, no, this actually feels like an unhealthy position for me to be in. My boundaries are being crossed. This is actually a change I need to make for my recovery versus like running away from the trigger. Okay. So, there he gives a case study of a woman who had a lot of pain, and so she wasn't able to work. It was pelvic pain, and she did this work and was getting, to where she felt like she wanted to be independent, but her parents were basically emotionally reliant on her, and she was helping her parents with their emotional needs, and she wanted to move on with her life but felt angry with them and guilty for wanting to abandon them. So dealing with that problem in her life was a necessary step in her recovery, right? So if she had just kept living in that situation, not saying she couldn't recover, but for her, like, moving out was the important step for her. And then powerful expressions of anger in a safe and private setting, for instance, when one is alone or working with a close friend or therapist, will reduce the anger by releasing it and allows you to be free of anger that has been carried into your current life from the hurtful events of your past. So you can process basically old anger, repressed anger, and you can release it so that then when you go to that next thing with your boss, you're not projecting that anger from your childhood onto your boss because you've cleaned all that old stuff up. Okay, so that's the process that we're going to be doing in this book. As a result of this safe release, your actions out in the real world can be undertaken with much less anger toward everyday events and toward the people who may have hurt you in the past. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. This just made me think of, like, if you're driving and you're in an angry mood already with something going on, and then it's like, oh, I can't believe this. Like, oh, this person, they're so dumb. I can't believe you just get angry about every little thing. Or if you're just newly in love and you're driving around and someone cuts you off and you're like, oh, that's fine. Wow, that's so silly. What a beautiful day. So, um, yeah, resolving that anger will allow us to see the other side of what's going on that's also there. Often it's important to both speak to people in our lives and take action about troubling situations. So you might not need to have some boundaries, and you might need to talk to some people that you're not wanting to talk to or have been avoiding. So anxiety and depression or other mind-body syndrome symptoms may have derailed your life to the extent that you've been unable to work, leave the house, or go out with friends, see family members, or participate in sports. You may have become socially isolated, lost romantic relationships, or even been unable to be intimate with lovers. In order to heal, you'll need to face many of these situations and recover from them. So, did any of those resonate with you? Were you like, okay, that might be something going on, right? That, there's this pattern that I have just been avoiding instead of addressing. And by actually starting to know how with these tools to address it, then that will be what I need for healing. Okay, I left my controlling and selfish parents for the last time at age 20, and chronic pain started a few years later. After getting into incest recovery, decades later, I became aware of feeling guilt always in the background. Yeah, yeah. Sorry to hear that. Glad you found this work. Um, yeah, that's the beauty of this work, like especially something like a sexual assault victim that is feeling guilty, that undeserved guilt. um we need to help people in our societies with stuff like this, like not just if they have pain and they find this approach, but just having that emotional intelligence to know that we do not need to guilt or shame ourselves, right, for that. Okay, so where was I? Okay, so just thinking of these kind of symptoms, your brain did this to try to protect you from what it thought was dangerous in the world. But it's resulted unintentionally in isolation and disability. So it does take a great deal of courage to return to work when the environment has been difficult, to start exercising again, to begin a new romantic relationship. Yet if these hurdles are not faced, there's a tendency to fall back into anxiety, depression, and or chronic pain. You squirm describing them as selfish. Oh, which part are you talking about? Um, oh, that other people were selfish. Yeah, this is good stuff for our awareness. Oh, sending a virtual hug. Oh, so sweet. Okay. I was just checking in with the chat. Okay. So some people fall into patterns of using alcohol, marijuana, or narcotic painkillers to help them cope with anxiety or depression and the underlying emotional pain of the stressful life events prompting their mind-body syndrome symptoms. That was a mouthful, but um, getting out of these unhealthy and unhelpful patterns, or at least reducing their use to a minimum, is essential as a part of healing. So this could be one of the first steps in the recovery process before you're doing, as much of the exercises in this book and that work, or concurrently addressing those kind of chemical dependencies. And like he said before, if you are using medicines for anxiety, depression, pain, you don't have to necessarily get right off of them either, right? That might be more stressful to your system. So the people eventually who do the best in this program are those who ultimately wean themselves off of the anxiety, depression, or pain medications under the supervision of a physician, of course. And in order to reduce and ultimately discontinue these medications, it's necessary to have completed the above steps of the educational, behavioral, and emotional work in the process of unlearning your anxiety or depression. And it's necessary to be completely confident that you've beaten mind-body syndrome and don't need the medications anymore. So ultimately, right, we're not talking about first steps at all right here. Your first steps are go with what feels right for you and talk to your doctor if you're thinking about weaning off. And he had the alcohol or narcotics anonymous, if that feels like more of what you want to address first. But basically, he says you have to address that. And he does say here it's necessary to do the education, behavioral, and emotional work before you can really discontinue the medications, right? So there's almost, it could almost be like basically case by case scenario, right? So, on the other hand, as I was just saying, some people find that these medications are helpful and necessary to use in conjunction with the mind body syndrome program. So, do what's best for you. In general, if you've been doing this work or if you're thinking about your situation and you're having difficulty reversing the symptoms of anxiety or depression, it's usually because you have a problem in one of the four major areas. That would be a review, understanding how and believing that neural circuits are the cause of their symptoms is one, doing the emotional work required to free them of deep-seated emotional hurts is two, making the behavioral changes necessary and overcome the symptoms. I think that has a typo there. Necessary to overcome the symptoms, necessary to overcome the symptoms. Yeah, it just doubles there. Um, and then for making the changes in their lives. So there's the rewiring the brain and changing your life. And if you are able to make progress in all of these areas, you have a very high likelihood of beating anxiety and depression, as well as chronic pain, fatigue, insomnia, or any other symptoms that may be caused by MBS. And then he says, note, the final 7 chapters are identical to those in Unlearn Your Pain, since the recovery program for anxiety and depression is identical to that of chronic structural pain, non-structural pain. Okay, so if you if you followed the book club for Unlearn Your Pain, it's actually going to be the same chapters. I was kind of debating if I should go ahead and do them again or just have you refer to the other ones. But since we're focused more on anxiety and depression, he does say you can kind of, when you're doing the exercises, substitute your symptoms for pain. So yeah, I thought I just decided I thought it would be better to go through those last 7 chapters with you guys. So we'll still have a chance to do what parts of that resonate with you. He doesn't say you have to go through and do every single line and every single thing and exercise. It's more about doing some general things, which we'll start talking about next week. And until then, what's on your mind today? Any questions, any insights, anything you want to come and share? Thank goodness for Schubiner. I know, right? I really love how he can just he puts things into steps and categories, and he'll kind of simplify. He'll simplify things. He'll give you the framework. Doesn't mean it's easy. He says it's a 28-day program, but like it would be like an hour of kind of deep emotional work every single day. So unless you're like on a 30-day retreat or something where you have nothing else to deal with, it is a lot. So don't hold yourself to that. But yeah, there's a lot there. And I wish we were taught this long ago. I know that that is the truth. The nice thing is I think it is really coming to a lot of people's awareness now. I don't know about you, but of course, because of what I do, probably my Facebook feed is like full of all these people talking about this. So I'm like, I think really more people are talking about this kind of stuff, or at least the nervous system and self-development. Interesting that so many of us are in similar situations with elderly parents. Yeah, I know, right? Because a lot of people here generally in the chronic pain world are women, and usually it's kind of it's not like 100%, but usually in the 30s, 40s, people start to get those symptoms. And a lot of times that is when we're starting to have all these changes of children leaving the house and taking care of parents, and the sandwich generation, and especially those socialized as women are really taught to be caretakers and devoted and have that sense of duty. Oh, yes, sandwich generation, Jennifer said too. Yeah, exactly. So you're not alone. And honestly, even personally too, with I've my dad has Alzheimer's and there's three girls in the area. And I think my sisters are really mad at me not helping as much. I hate to say it, but they don't like when I would take a day and go skiing and I wasn't working and I wasn't helping him. And but at some point, this is what this work teaches you, is to be, have that self help first so that you then can give to people without resentment, without harming yourself or depleting yourself. I like that you're going to continue this group and your insights are super helpful, or are helpful. Sorry, I added a super on there as I read it. That's funny. And then Alexis, thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome. Uh, yeah, Mary, it's hard to be in the sandwich generation. And since we're living longer, we're caring for the elderly parents when we're older too. Yeah. And then Susan, my symptoms started after my parents died from guilt. Yeah. Yeah. And Jennifer, we have to learn to balance our needs and theirs. And my siblings seem to hate me. Oh my gosh, Allison. Same. Same. Yeah. And yeah, especially if you've grown up being a people pleaser, you just really can't do that anymore when you're doing this work. You just start to learn to stand up for yourself, and you just find that balance for yourself. And I took some time really not caring for my dad probably as much as I wanted to, but I kind of I had so much resistance. And then when I felt like I had, my nervous system was more regulated and I had the capacity and I could do more, now I do it so much more happily, joyfully, not resentfully. But yeah, it's really hard. These kinds of things to navigate are really, really hard. And how many of you feel like there's like some of this stuff is just emotional stuff from earlier, way earlier? It's just stuff you didn't even really realize was going on. But yeah, definitely, like if you're dealing with family stuff, that can bring up more of the sibling rivalries that were there, and the parental memories. And then Jennifer, I'd love advice on this situation where uncle complained to me about my dad. In the moment, I didn't know what to say. Yeah. Right? Like, oh, we can picture that, where we might even go into fawn, like we just don't even know what to do, and we want to be liked, and so we just sit there listening to this horrible story of your adult parent and brother fighting, and you're like, I don't even want to hear this. um yeah, sometimes the best we can do is learn from situations like that and then think about what we might do in the future to have a boundary. And so maybe it's something that you say that's really simple, like, hey, I know this sounds really stressful and it sounds like you have a lot of emotions about this, but it's just really hard for me to hear you talking about this stuff with my dad. So if you're going to keep doing that, I might need to hang up the phone, or let's just change the conversation. Sometimes you can put a boundary out there like that and actually tell them, and sometimes you don't even need to. You might be able to work it into, like, oh, hey, I hear what you're saying, and I wish I had the capacity to hear all of that right now, but maybe we could talk about something else, like that new puppy you got. Tell me more about that, or how's the weather there, or whatever. So sometimes I use that technique when people want to talk about their pain. Someone you haven't seen for a while, they associate you with your pain, and they see you, oh, how's your pain? And you don't want to get into all this stuff. So you're like, oh, thank you so much for asking. And I really appreciate that you are thoughtful like that. And actually, what I'm working on is this program where we don't talk about our symptoms, but let's talk about what's going on with your husband and how that went with his trip or whatever, right? You just change the subject. Okay. Being an only child, I think it made me put more pressure on myself. Yeah, I know only children feel that. Um, Jennifer reminded me of parents doing the same thing. When my mom complained about my dad, I would tell her it was inappropriate to talk to me about him. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that sometimes we have to have some hard conversations, but it's easier than the effect on us when we don't have those hard conversations, right? And actually seeing that it probably helps everyone when we stand up for ourselves like that. Because me taking that on and then feeling bad, and then maybe I complain to someone else, or I feel resentful when I see that person, it's just, this is painful work to rewire these habits of kind of being a people pleaser or going into fawn. But it's important work and it's going to be so helpful. And then you're going to be an example for your children and for your people that you're interacting with of how to model, having conversations and saying, hey, when you speak like that, that really hurts me to hear that. And so let's just, agree that we either talk this way or I'm just going to have to end the conversation right there. And maybe I have to block you, not to threaten or anything, right? But yeah, good question, because that's not comfortable, but it's also when we don't really know what to say, and haven't thought it through, then we might tend to blame ourselves. Well, maybe I should, I'm just such a good listener. I shouldn't have, you know what I mean? We could blame it on ourselves, but we want to just start to see these patterns, notice them, notice how bad we feel in our body when this stuff is going on. And that's our indicator of like, okay, this is how I want to handle it differently now. Maybe I still want to go and visit my mom, but when she starts, saying those mean things about me, I leave the room. Or maybe I know that she has dementia and I am able to reframe it in a certain way or whatever it is, right? Or I limit the time or I only go certain hours. It's so hard to get stuck between two people. Yeah. Yeah. Again, like Dr. Schubiner said, most of us that have this are like the sweetest people. We want to be caring, we're compassionate and empathetic with other people, right? So this is our work. It's a lifestyle change. Yeah. There's no winning. Yeah, there's no winning when you're stuck between two people. The person you need to really take the most care of, even though society might have told you differently, is yourself first. It really just is. And then you can take care of those other people. And sometimes taking care of them means you cut them off for a little while and don't talk to them for a little while, right? Sometimes that's the healthiest relationship, is you're not supporting their negative behavior. So we'll get into all this kind of stuff more. I did want to mention, so as I was doing this, I was doing the slides, I just thought of this today. He mentions that you can work with a therapist, work with a coach for the emotional processing. And I really do love helping people with that. It's really transformative. If you think that you might have, some of what he's talking about, some of the repressed anger, especially if you've already done therapy, like you've already tried all these things, but you're still thinking like, okay, there's probably something from my childhood that is that emotional baggage that we want to clear. I'm offering a 60-minute session for a limited time for just $49. So it would be to process through these emotions together in a safe place. First of all, becoming aware of them and then expressing them so that you can move through them instead of having them stuck there, right? And forming these habits. And just for new clients, please. So if you've already had a lot of sessions with me and stuff. This is just for people who haven't had that chance yet and who might want that opportunity and are curious about it. And it's really hard to do on your own. So I'll have a link for that in the emails, and just let me know if you don't get my emails for some reason, and I'll get you that link. All right, you guys, thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.